how clear are you on what you really want to do or be? For most of us, that is a lifelong journey of exploration and discovery. In fact, this is a pursuit with deep historical roots. Many ancient wisdom traditions urge us to know thyself as a core principle for living a good life. It often takes many experiences and trials for us to start discovering who we truly are and muster the courage to live more authentic lives. Jazz legend Miles Davis once said, "Sometimes you have to play a long time to play like yourself." That quote applies to music as much as it does to life, and my conversation with Marte Siebenhar resonates with it. In this episode, Marte and I dig into her journey as a classically trained musician and orchestra performer, teacher, arts organization executive, and entrepreneur. We explore lessons she learned along the way, including how process beats goals, pitfalls of getting what we want, discovering who we really are and what we want, creative approaches to becoming qualified for a new job, developing our intuition, and lessons in personal transformation. Let's dive in. And today, I have the pleasure of having the marvelous Miss Marte Siebenhar with us. Hi, Marte.
Hi. Good to
Excellent
be
to
with
have
you,
you.
Ezekiel.
Hey. So, Marte, you have a really interesting background, or at least I think you do. And that background includes, on the first part of the journey, musical training of the classical sort, then being a administrator, marketer, and executive in arts organizations. So we'll touch on that. And now you have your own consulting firm. And more recently, we'll save this for the end, then you're also experimenting with other tools for transformation, right? That you're working with people. So we'll touch on that a little bit later on in the journey. So let's go in order. So first of all, tell us about what you're up to now and what do you get paid to do?
Amazing. Thanks for the intro. Yes, I am the poster child for the nonlinear career, and I love it. I always felt like you were supposed to do something really transformative, really amazing. And that definition has changed as I've changed over the years. And I love evolving. It's something that I'm committed to. That's like my practice is to keep transforming as a human being. And I really love being in a career and in a place with my own firm to be able to do that for a living and support other people in the process of it. So right now, what I'm doing is I have a consulting and coaching firm called Cultured Innovations. And we really work with people who are looking to make change. These are leaders, these are creative people, and give them practical tools to help them succeed. Oftentimes, people have an idea of what they want to do, the impact that they want to make, the vision that they have, but they may not know exactly what the steps are. So we help them concretize their vision into strategies and steps and provide support along the way. We also do a fair bit of grant writing to help boost the abundance of the people that we're working with so that they can realize those visions over a period of time. So that's what I get paid to do. I get paid to consult and coach. I'm involved pretty heavily in strategy, and transformation is best done on purpose. So rather than try and do that on the fly, we really think through things that make sense, strategies that make sense based on right sizing. We don't do something that's going to be way out of scope or way out of bounds or way out of budget. We work with what the clients have, and we're very practical about helping move them toward, again, those steps. Sometimes it's like small wins add up to big change. But honestly, how to make transformation is something that not a lot of people know how to do successfully in partnership with other people. A lot of people are good at doing it inside teams. What I love about this is often, again, I work with people who know what they want to go for, but they may not know exactly how to get there. So we do success on purpose. That's the tagline for my company, success on purpose. And it really is like, how do we take that thing that you want to do and do it in a really meaningful, intentional way? And I just could not be more grateful and in love with this work.
That's excellent. So let's rewind the clock way, way, way back. And I want to spend a little bit of time exploring your musical training and education. And first of all, so how did that come about? How did you choose to go into that direction in the earlier part of your life?
I was very fortunate. I was the kind of child that was always making up ways to express myself. I was doing interpretive dances. I was building and creating things out of whatever I could get my hands on. My mom was very attuned to my creativity, and she constantly found ways of putting materials and resources in my hands where I could basically entertain myself. I'm sure she felt like escaping because I had a constant need to create. And I wanted everybody in on the party. I remember my parents would entertain, and I would kind of like work the room and involve everybody. It was at this social gathering, involve them in some way collaboratively with whatever it was that I wanted to create. And many patient adults did comply, and to my great joy at the time. So I always felt very lucky to have people who recognized my talent and were able to give me the tools and resources and access to getting better, like achieving a degree of mastery. So I've been playing music since forever. I remember very concretely making a tape of singing along to the radio for my dad's birthday, and I would superimpose personal messages to him along with singing. And, it was in tune because I had a good ear as a child. But other than that, it was like kind of weird and kind of a lot. Going back and listening to that now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, my poor father. But I always was involved in creating. And so creativity just kind of flowed through me. And I went to a preschool that really, it wasn't a Montessori, but it was definitely a modality that encouraged exploration and learning through play. So play has always been a part of what I want to do. And for a long time in my career, my job was to play, right? To play music is a little bit different, but I was involved in musicals, I took art lessons, I got very serious about studying music. But part of why I liked music is that you do something together you cannot do alone. You move a lot of energy and you transform the space emotionally. And it took me quite a few steps in my career to realize that you don't need an instrument in your hands to do that. So that kind of took me to music school, studying in New York City at age 18. I'm from a small college town in the Midwest, and my father's a language professor. My mom is a first grade teacher, so learning is always a big thing. But I was always so motivated to be in a place where everybody from lots of different places would be together to do something again you can't do by yourself. And New York City just felt like the most amazing ideal for just learning about the world and learning about people who were not like me. And it was amazing. I actually ended up subbing with my favorite orchestra for a concert cycle. And this is the orchestra that I've been dreaming of my whole life to perform with. And I was in my master's degree. I have my bachelor's in oboe performance, and my master's is in orchestral performance. So naturally, that is not what I'm doing. But, I realized that for me, being in that situation, all these amazing people playing at such a high level. It's like being inside a Rolls Royce. It's just like, it's not just people playing, it's like listening and responding and like nuance everywhere and all nonverbal, right? Wow. Crazy, amazing, highly gifted people, just like a machine being inside there and being like, wow, this is so finely tuned. It was amazing. But I do remember the sense that I just felt unhappy on that stage. I was like, this really it for me? Is this as far as it goes? And that's a hugely privileged thing to say because that is the dream of a lot of people. But I realized that the routine would be the same my whole career. So I was like, oh, but I really love making things up. I love starting from zero. I like the unknown, the uncertain. And it took me a while to realize that music would not do that for me, at least in the orchestral setting. It's a highly controlled thing and you show up and you do your part. But I wanted to be in a room full of people who were amazing and also talk to them and learn and collaborate together in a different way. So that took me to arts education, and kids are creative and brilliant. And I learned a lot from the work that I did in that sphere. And that was much more about, using the artistic process that I had studied and learned and worked on. I don't want to say I mastered it, but I put in definitely my 10,000 hours. And process orientation is really what drives me now. And again, if you're going to be transformative, it's nice to anchor in something. And for me, it's not necessarily goals, it is process. I believe process is the way that we transform. And that's something that I learned in music school. And I know how to show up, create the conditions, create the container, show up and do the work and achieve results, not having to have it turn out a certain way, but knowing what the vision is and achieving results through process. So that's something that I still use, and I use probably more than I ever have in my work, working with my clients now. So, but yeah, music. Did not ever expect I'd be doing this or having this conversation, and I'm so grateful for that.
So I just want to ask you about something, and then feel free to pass if this is not within your experience. But so you studied classical music training. I'm curious, have you spent time yourself or with people who are in musical, spend time in musical genres that are more, when there's more improvisation or jamming, be that jazz or some other form? How would you contrast those two different flavors, those two worlds? And can you explain the difference to the musically
Sure.
uneducated like myself?
Sure. So in music school, most people don't know what that means or like what that is like. So pretty much you're playing for people who are giving you an opinion, and it's always critical. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, but as a musician or in a career like this, you are getting paid to be criticized, basically. Somebody always has an opinion about their people who are paid to give their opinion on everybody's playing, critics and all that. So, especially when a piece of music is well known, there's a right way to do it. And what I found is in music, I had amazing guides, amazing mentors, amazing teachers. They wanted me to play it their way. And in a certain sense, I felt very constrained by whether it was my chamber music coach or it was my teacher or it was the orchestra conductor. And I had orchestra conductors with 100 of us on stage, young musicians, like all shiny and eager to please and to play at our absolute top game, to suddenly pick a person in the orchestra that perhaps was not even playing at the time, call them out by name and totally publicly shame them about something they may or may not have done because it's this cult of opinion. And I just felt like that was not only not fair, but what's the point of that? Just to establish authority or something like that. So I admit, like, for me, it felt very constraining after a while that I couldn't seem to find my voice because somebody was always telling me how to play it their way. And of course, you're a student, that makes sense. But I realized that for me, that's recreation. That's not creation. That's not the kind of creation that my soul seeks, my soul hungers for. So after music school, I really felt rebellious. I didn't want anybody to tell me how to do it anymore. So I actually had a friend and fellow grad of Manhattan School of Music who is a sax player, jazz. And I said, Samir, I really want to learn jazz. Can you teach me? So I was working full time as an arts administrator, working with kids, developing curriculum, helping teaching artists learn how to work in classrooms with kids in New York City public schools, which is amazing. Kids are such leaders and they're so smart and they will tell you exactly what's happening in ways that adults never will. It's just amazing. But Samir said, okay, great. And I have to say that my ear got so much better because my assignments were two things usually: go listen to the solo and write it down. If you ever heard Coltrane, he doesn't do things in complete and utter like Apollonian rhythm. He's improvising. So that means that there's agency. He takes risks. He does measurements that are hard to write down on the page because they're not something that you've ever heard before necessarily. So my ear got better because I had to translate what I was hearing. And by the way, in music school, you have to learn to hear music and write it down. You have to see music without hearing it and sing it on demand in pitch, in rhythm, four parts at once sometimes, not the singing part, but so all these skills that are super helpful for musicians, but that most human beings would never think of because why? It's like when you're taking a language class and you take dictation, you do that, but with like 4-part harmony on the piano, you get to hear it 4 times through and then that's it. And you get what you get, right? So transcribing a solo in jazz was awesome because I was like, it really expanded what was possible for me. And then the second thing is he asked me to write my own charts. I don't know about you, but when you learn blues form, there's a rhythm to it. So there's a certain amount of chords that go a certain way. At a certain point, there's a shift, but it's all very regular. And on top of that, you get to improvise. But he actually asked me to write my own melodies. And then once I wrote my own melodies, we got to the improv. And here's the thing with blues form, it still has rules, right? So I was a brand new jazz student. I was so excited, like, now I get to break the rules. I get to improvise. I get to play it my way. And what ended up happening was, I don't know, about 18 months in, he's like, all right, let's really get into improv. And I just kind of started doing it. And he's like, no, 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 you can't just do whatever you want. And I was like, what? I thought that was the whole point. He's like, "No, you have the structure so you can be free, but you need the structure." And, you know, and this is something I heard in music school. Like once you have it traditionally, once you absorb the basics, then you can do whatever you want. And I was like, "No, man, I'm out because I just don't want to operate that. Like I did that, do it my way, do it my way, do it my way, and then you can do it your way." Like I was done with that. So I adore jazz, and the times that I do play now, it's usually playing Charlie Parker with a group of friends at like a wine bar. There's an amazing piece called Bird with Strings and saxophone solo, oboe, string section, rhythm section. It's amazing and so, so fun. But definitely my skills have declined as a musician because I'm not using them every day. But it's that sense of being in space with people and really creating something new and fresh and bringing my energy to transform kind of what's happening in the room. That has always been something that I love. And that's what I love about, coaching and facilitating that. But yeah, you can't just do everything you want to do. It's like, I'm out.
So wait, so let me pull that thread because I just want to gut gut test this, pressure test this idea. Is it do you think it's necessarily true, or is it just one way of approaching music that you learn the basics and then you do whatever you want later, or do you think there's space to do something else, or is that the only way? What do you think?
There's definitely space to do something else, but that's not the conservatory way. And whether or not he
Hmm.
meant to, my jazz teacher was still trained in the conservatory, like he had learned the right way. And so, but I think it takes a teacher. And honestly, like I was training to be in an orchestra. You have to conform in an orchestra. You cannot stand out because it's not appropriate. It's not the way it's all structured. Like you do your part, they do their part. But if you like start to change the rules, it doesn't work. So I learned to conform. And at that point in my life, I was a very different person, very wallflowery. Like, don't look at me. I don't exist. Like, I want to blend in. Please don't ask me a question kind of thing. Not who I am now. And I'm glad that I was that person because it's helped me really reclaim and redefine who I am. But I would say that the training has the general philosophy that if you succeed, it's because you're following the path that is prescribed, or you're so far into your own vision and living it and it's real that it doesn't matter when anybody says you're sure you'll succeed. So I was more kind of like the insecure, what do I do to make sure I do this thing that I want to do? I know it's super bold to commit to this life, but it takes a really different teacher, leader, in my opinion, to tell people what is really in them to unlock their potential rather than teaching the way you were taught. And there's even a whole thing where we talk about the lineage of different professors, different teachers in different instruments and their way of doing it. So like even in the American oboe school, there's the Math way and there's the Bloom way. I don't know if that exists anymore because that was a lot of years ago, but like Bloom students would never talk to Mac students and they'd make fun of each other. And I'm like, yo, this is like so niche. Does it really but there was a
Well,
way to do
yeah.
it. So to teach in a different way it wouldn't have been at a conservatory that I would have found a person like that.
Hmm.
But it ended up I'm my own teacher, and that was
Right.
very good practice for me to look within.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to explore that for a few moments because it's not to make the teachers or the people with that approach wrong,
They're not wrong.
because they're following a way, and it's a way and it works in
It's
certain
a
ways.
legacy. They're upholding the legacy. They're preserving it. It's conservatory. You conserve things. You don't try to do
Yeah,
new things.
but even within the jazz experience that you
Yeah.
had, but uh, but but there's that space, of being aware, of having like self-awareness, of just being aware of when something is, it's not the way it is, it's just a way that exists, right? But I think I mean, we all, no judgment, I mean, we all experience or fall into that, or will fall into that in the future, thinking that there's this one way, but usually there are other ways, and it is
And
refreshing to be open to that. And then bless you, because that's part of, I think, what you try to do for people is just open door, 1 through 5, and be like, we can go through all these doors, like, where do you want to go?
yeah,
I don't know, what do you think?
definitely resonate with all of that. And I agree with you. At that time, I had no life experience. I didn't know what
Sure.
other ways there were. That's part of the reason I wanted to go to New York is like, what other ways, how other ways can it be, you know? So I also, there's a little bit of solemnity in the training to be a classical musician. It's very vulnerable and very exposed, but it is also very competitive. So you have your studio of people who play the same instrument who will study with your teacher, and you're often like pitted against them in auditions. So it's like friendly, but also like there's competition because everyone is going for that first chair, top orchestra kind of thing. And so the dynamics I felt for me, I didn't really know what to do. It's not like somebody said, "Hey, Marta, when you get to music school, keep these things close to yourself or look at all the possibilities." I was told, honestly, by more than one source, there are two ways. One is orchestra and one is failure. And so I kind of like, and my very well meaning, beautiful, amazing teacher said, "You're here to learn my way. So erase everything about yourself and fill yourself up with me. And later on, you can add back whatever it is that is your voice. But if you want to do your own thing, this isn't the right thing for you. But I will get you in an orchestra, and that is what a success is. So we'll do it my way so that you can be successful." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like again, what did I know? And he is brilliant and he has placed many students in orchestras. I realized that through experience that wasn't enough for me. And that it actually for me isn't orchestra or failure. I don't know if you've seen the Eddie Izzard sketch like Cake or Death. It's like cake or
Yeah.
death. Cake, please. It's like nobody wants to go over the edge. And
Yeah.
because it is such, and there have been articles about the centralization of power in conservatories and in different ways that there have been violations of the trust that you place in your teacher. I never experienced that personally. Very grateful for that. I always had really nurturing, really amazing teachers who were very generous with their time, very generous with opportunities. I did get to sub, with New York Phil, and that's an absolute privilege that I recognize I'm so grateful for. But I didn't know that it wasn't one thing or another. There's a stigma when you leave school that, or if you stray from the path, that somehow you're questioning the authority of all the people, again, the legacies that have come before you. I just found that to be really interesting. And for me, I was like, well, I want to know my work is making a difference. I can't even see the people out there to know if like the counting that I'm doing and like the criticism I'm doing of myself for being sharp or being slightly late in an entrance and things like, oh, I didn't blend with the horn, like all of the stuff that goes in. I just was self-critical to a point where I was like, if I keep being in a place where I'm criticizing myself for a living, I will cease to be, because this is not a recipe for success for me. And I'm also not a person who wants to play all day long. And those people are going to be successful no matter what. I liked people. I like to hang out and socialize on breaks. Like, ooh, talk to this person, talk to that. Like, what about the ideas? let's nerd out about like this recording or whatever. So, for me, I got the experience by being exposed to all these ways, but my parents are educators. I was never raised in a really rigid way of thinking. So I got to try it on. Like, okay, I'll do it that way. I'll erase the whatever and like experiment with that. Like it was an experiment. It was a really, really good one. And it was super valuable. But it's not something that it's like, I don't know if you've seen Mozart in the Jungle, but it's a little bit of a happy caricature of what happens in the musical world. But it's really tough to make it. So they make it very clear it's not for everyone. If you want to be successful, you have to be serious. And how I interpreted that was probably not the healthiest way, but I didn't have a whole lot of models who were willing to talk about how they got there in a way that either didn't aggrandize them and put them on a pedestal, or where you saw what a wreck, it can be if you commit to a life that ending up not being very happy. And there are plenty of people who are my peers who are out doing their thing and, they're playing the same music 8 times a week for 10 years. I don't think I could do that. And so, everything's a choice, but I decided to try on that persona. And I have to say, like, I was not a healthy person. Like, it was the worst part of my life in terms of my own insecurity and being triggered all the time and feeling unworthiness. Like a lot of the stuff that I work with clients on are like limiting beliefs and feelings of being constrained or fearful to be seen. Like I've lived all of that. I've lived the deepest shame and depression on the planet. And so I totally get that. And I don't think I would be nearly as effective or compassionate if I had not actually experienced that. It was very painful, a lot of that training. But again, I'm super grateful for it because it gave me a deeper, broader sense of like all of the different possibilities and different experiences in my own life. And it definitely made me more creative because it made me reach for more. If this is it, and I'm going to be recreating Beethoven's Fifth at that point, 23 years old, I already played Beethoven's Fifth like 20 times. What happens when it's 80 or 90 or 100? This time I'm really going to nail it. I don't know. For me, it was like, I just like things that are different and changing. And I realized very quickly that that is not that industry. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that industry.
Right.
It just wasn't for me.
Yeah. This also makes me think of this notion of the things that we don't know that we don't know. And when we're young, right? And well, even now, like when we're older, I think I also, work with leaders in innovation. And part of that work is opening up ourselves to do some discovery. And it's pushing back against that certainty, like, no, this is like we know our customers, we know how it is, this is the way. We're like, well, let's go discover something. And 9 times out of 10, we'll go talk to some people, and then they come back and they're like, oh my God, I learned so much from just
Mm,
having like 3 10-minute conversations, right there.
yeah.
It's enlightening to just go discover and be just especially poke way beyond the boundaries of your comfort and what you know, right? And see if you discover something that you didn't know that you didn't know. And then there's good stuff there, and that's also sometimes the stuff that bites us in the butt, right? Like the
Yeah.
stuff that we don't know, like we just the absence of awareness.
I love that actually. And one of my favorite things is working with people who they think they're doing it right. They're like,
Mhm.
this is the right way, but they know something is not working. And so that is for me an absolute brilliant thing. I remember coming into a situation with it was very corporate and very artistic. I was brought into an artistic visioning process for a major professional orchestra, and the musicians who are unionized put it into their collective bargaining agreement. They wanted to be more involved in choosing programs. So more involved in the artistic programming, not just showing up and performing, not just showing up and rehearsing, but like helping to design what the art is. And that's pretty radical and is not a thing that is widely done. There's a committee that, usually approves, but and I'm not an expert in orchestra, so forgive me if I'm not getting this 100% right, but it was pretty innovative for this group to say, like, we're actually going to put it in our contract that we're going to be involved in programming. So they didn't really know how to move forward. And as you can imagine, there's administration and then there's the unionized musicians and pretty harmonious all in all. But like they never, this is like a totally brand new industry. This had never happened before. So they brought me in to kind of like help them structure that and help them design it. And I have to say, like, if you're working in those situations, power is very clear. It's very, very clear. And one of the things that I find is you cannot make change unless you get uncomfortable. You cannot meet the unknown unless you're willing to go there. And uncomfortable people are surprisingly open to whatever comes next. So I took the opportunity to level the playing field and level the power just a bit, because when everybody's uncomfortable, the whole tenor of the conversation goes very differently. And there's some really creative ideas that came out. It was a very collaborative thing, board staff and musicians, and we designed something pretty cool. I don't know if they're still using it, but that was really beautiful. And I love that they came in and they allowed me to establish a different level of listening and trust, because what you know, but you have to do something unknown. It's kind of scary. So I love those situations, moving people through emotional space where either they know something's wrong, but they don't know how to fix it, or they have something completely brand new and they're like, what do I do? But yeah, uncertainty and discomfort are the way that you get to transformation. And the fun thing is, I love play again. So we don't just like attack it head on. We kind of like playfully move through it. The discomfort is usually fleeting. And then people start saying, oh, what about that? What about that? And you can feel the energy really, really shift
Yeah.
and change. Like you're saying, well, you don't know what you don't know. It's when you don't know what you don't know, and then you see it, you're like, "Ooh, there's possibility there." So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move the clock forward and you're already started to dip into, then you transition from studying music, this classical music training world, into arts organizations. And then you kind of had, you've worked at some really cool organizations, the Kennedy Center, New World Symphony in Miami, and some others. Just take us through that journey and how was that like?
Yeah, my first job was at Midorian Friends in New York, and it was bringing I remember going into a pizzeria in St. Mark's Place with my best friend who I was living with at the time, and we were doing the back of the napkin future thing. She's like, "What do you wanna have for your career?" I was like, "I don't know, but it's not working 9 to 5." And so we wrote it all out. I still have the napkin. I still have it.
Mm,
And we joke about it sometime because she's a classically trained flute player. Now she's a baby doctor. And just like I do what I do. We're like the back of the napkin, we revisit every now and then. But my first job was 10 to 6. So thank you, universe. You're hilarious. Not 9 to 5, 10 to 6. But I had no experience even with like Excel, or I had known how to put a resume together. So I had word skills, but the internet was kind of new. I'm dating myself now, but I didn't really understand corporate culture. I am a highly motivated person. I want to make a difference. I am diligent. I'm a good Midwestern girl who works hard. I finish what I start, but I really learned at Carnegie Hall how teams work in a healthy way together. I was so fortunate to be exposed to the amazing leadership and modeling of Sarah Johnson, who is still head of the Wild Music Institute, which is the education arm of Carnegie Hall, and I believe is responsible for maybe even more than the artistic programming worth of revenue now. She's really created an amazing transformative program that touches so many lives in New York City that go, and internationally, quite frankly, that go way beyond attending a physical concert at the hall. So I learned about corporate culture there. I made a lot of mistakes, and man, at that time in my life, I still felt insecure. I was trying to prove myself. I was desperately hoping somebody would say like, "Oh, you're talented. Let me give you an opportunity." And I just needed to be right, and I squandered a lot of those opportunities looking back at it, and sometimes I'm just like, "Why did I do that?" But I learned good lessons there, and I had such strong modeling in terms of, like, how to shape something that brings people from this place to this place emotionally, being in the classroom, you see what works and doesn't. And I had a kind of an intuitive sense of like how to coach and guide teaching artists to have the kind of results that we were looking for because we wanted the kids to succeed. I'll just say, like, if in the classroom something's not working, it's not the kids, it's you. So being in that situation of having to constantly recalibrate based on what was happening, going to the teachable moment, throwing out the plan, made me very flexible as and very intuitive as a facilitator. And I still use those skills. But I think for me, the corporate culture of all of the stratified levels of people was pretty interesting for me to learn. And, Kennedy Center had that, New World Symphony had that. When you have something big, it has to be more structured usually so that things can flow in a really clear way. I loved my fellowship at the Kennedy Center. My boss at Carnegie Hall is amazing. She is just so brilliant. She is only a couple years older than me. And I was like, well, in terms of advancing, I know that I'm going to get far on the program team. And working with teachers is amazing, but I could not change the reality for them of the things that were really like just systemic about how they do their work and the lack of support. Just because if you had a music teacher, a theater teacher, an art teacher, they probably didn't have a whole lot of support, not by design, but just out of need and
Yeah.
resources. If you have one, you have one. And the principal may or may not be able to support them in the way to which they would like to be accustomed. So I couldn't really change the system for them, and that became a bit frustrating. So I was like, well, how do you do a healthy organization? And at that point, it was the economic meltdown, the banking crisis. And I remember as a Carnegie Hall and the lead sponsor, I believe, was like Bank of America or something. And questions about like, should we even be claiming that we're the season sponsor of Carnegie Hall? Or maybe it was a different bank, I forget. But it was like really people were cutting back because it was a scary time.
Yeah.
But of course, naturally, that's the best time to change careers and get a fellowship for $20,000 working and learning and,
Mm.
going to the Kennedy Center, moving house. So that's what I do. I have a friend who says, Marta, every time I talk to you, I know you're going to tell me something terrifying. So what is it now? And again, I love change. I'm very comfortable with things that move, which is why I feel like I'm pretty good at helping people through times of uncertainty or bringing together something that maybe doesn't exist into existence. Love helping people manifest. So Kennedy Center was amazing. I don't know why they picked me still. It's like they had so many amazing people apply for that program, but essentially they took 10 people from around the world, arts managers. And what Michael had done, Michael Kaiser is my mentor. He's the president of the Kennedy Center for, I think one of his first days was like 9/11. So pretty wild day to be in DC, sitting in the conference room, seeing the plane hit the Pentagon. I lived in New York at the time. I was in my senior year of college, and that was wild. But going back to the Kennedy Center, so one of the amazing things about that program was that I was exposed to international people and local people, American people who really cared about the arts. And Michael Kaiser had designed this program to train arts management talent because he'd gone on a 50-state tour during the economic crisis, and he had discovered that a lot of good art was being lost because people didn't know how to manage it. They didn't have the business training. So that's not fair, right? Everyone, like great art, deserves to reach the lives of people. So he decided he wanted to start to train people who cared about arts. And so give them management tools, train them himself if he had to, which is what he did, and so that they could go out and make the industry stronger nationwide because good art shouldn't be lost to bad management. So I learned business skills at the Kennedy Center, and I learned them by working with a team of marketers. I chose marketing as like my big challenge because it is terrifying to me to think about why does somebody buy something from somebody? What is this magic of which you speak? Getting people to buy a ticket to something, making the case for that, telling the story. It just felt so awkward and challenging. It's like I'm going to dive right in. Often when I'm scared of something, I just do that thing. So I figure I will learn by doing. And I do like to seek out people who can guide me and advise me if they're brave enough to do that. So I fell in love with marketing at the Kennedy Center. I just really didn't expect that. I had an amazing mentor, David Kiddo, who is to this day a very dear, close friend, guide, mentor. We've cried so many times together about various things. He's like such a beautiful person. And there are 2,000 shows a year at the Kennedy Center, not 300 like Carnegie Hall. So I learned how to, and he had like a 4-person team. I have no idea how they did that, but that was the main revenue center. He used to tell me he was the chief like M&M officer because M&Ms were part of concessions, which were part of earned revenue under tickets, which he was responsible for. And he used to say, like, I love M&Ms because we make $20,000 a year on M&Ms. It's like, how do you do this magic? So I worked with his team. They trained me. I learned how you sell things, how you track your metrics, how you do a lot of like quick troubleshooting, a lot about building networks around certain types of art and keeping those networks active, called affinity. And then I went to Major Gifts. So I spent 3 months in 3 different areas of the Kennedy Center as a full-time staff member. Not that just like set loose, part of team meetings. We were also learning practical things like strategic planning, finance, marketing, all of the things that you need, how to do programming, that type of thing. He was training CEO potential for the arts field. I don't know if I'm going too much in depth here, but I learned marketing fast, analytical, development, individual gifts, relationship, slow, talky talk. So being out and socializing was like, oh, okay, that helped me a lot when I was an executive and also fitting in to a bigger organization later. These different job functions attract different types of people and it's all analytical, but socializing is a part of work. And that was like a totally new concept for me. Not that I wasn't friendly and had amazing friends in my previous jobs, but like some people give and donate because that artistic form or that place is their social life. So I learned lots. I made amazing friends. And then at the end, they're like, okay, you got to go out and do your own thing now. So I'd lined up a job being an executive director of a small children's chorus, which I was really excited about. And they created I had been very entrepreneurial and took the fellowship as the time when I was going to learn absolutely as much as I could, meet as many people as I could. Again, this is not the wallflower girl who didn't want to be seen. It's like, I want to succeed. And that means I know I'm not going to do it myself. Who are you? Can you tell me, like, I want to know about your path. How did you get here? What motivates you? How did you stay fresh? How do you stay inspired? What advice would you give me? Who else should I talk to? All of these networking skills, they basically developed out of curiosity, and Kennedy Center really helped me learn how to work a room. And these are tips that I share with my social entrepreneur classes at Lynn University, the Watson Institute. They're brand new and they're gonna have to go out and socialize and pitch. So I try to share what I learned there. And of course I made tons of mistakes, but made really great friends. And Michael Kaiser came to me and said, Marta, we really like what you're doing, how you're creating projects, adding value. Everyone has nice things to say about you. It's the first time in a long time I know I didn't know everything. I knew I did not know everything. So I was very humble and I was in the let's learn. I want to learn. I want to learn by doing. I want to collect great people and provide value and be generous in whatever way I could. And that was definitely not my New York persona of like being right and yet feeling very, very insecure at the same time. And I got into consulting that way. They had me come in and help them develop their consulting firm, which is now it's its own thing, but it's affiliated with the University of Maryland. Michael retired from the Kennedy Center in 2015. And what a formative time. I was so, so lucky to be there and such a like it's the nation's cultural center. The performances alone, they've got people coming in from everywhere and they have a performance every single day of the year and just like super talented, best practices, people. I just like I got paid to learn. I mean, what a gift. So I stayed with them consulting for a while, helping train arts organizations on how to do good business. That was the thing that I had been I've been immersed in. And then after a year and a half, like the schedule and the travel and the, you know, 1 week in Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, 2 days in Grand Rapids, 3 days in Dallas, like it just became a lot. So I an opportunity came to consider Miami. And I talked to Michael and he's like, Marta, they need people like you. I was like, I don't know what that means. But he's like, if I were your age, I would do the same thing. And he said, I see myself and you in that you're probably going to want to do deep work and you're probably as a manager and probably want to do consulting so you can zoom out. And you may have that kind of like swing back and forth the rest of your career. He's like, you should go. If I were your age, I would do the same thing. And this has been the only place that's ever felt like home where I could be myself. And it's the people who aren't trying to be right, but are really open and collaborative and who help each other to succeed and who are open to best ideas, not necessarily right ideas. And sometimes we get it wrong, but to be in such a place where also it's not like industry silos, like you're a lawyer, so you can't talk to the finance person, can't talk to the arts. We're all here. We're all mixed together in this crazy thing that's disappearing into the ocean. And we're making it work. But in that way, that pioneer kind of like we kind of need each other to succeed. I just love it. And it's brought me into surprising conversations and opportunities to meet people like you. And it's been a real joy to be here. And I definitely don't always get it right, but I'm so open. And I know that the city I live in has really helped to open that part of me that is really, really dedicated to helping people transform and to be generous and to think about what is limiting us and to question it, especially this is the biggest
Yeah,
limitation.
absolutely. Just what you were just sharing makes me think of Rory Sutherland, who's like a speaker and author. He works at Ogilvy, and one of he has like this list of like 10 rules of alchemy, and one of them is the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea. it's it's great, and that's so true. It's not so black and white, right and wrong. It's just a different choice, right?
Yes.
That's fantastic. So here you are in Miami. So I just wanted to go back and pull on the thread of influences and really memorable teachers and mentors. I mean, obviously you've just been sharing about some of them. Within that, was there a memorable moment, something that happened, something that was said to you, just kind of moments that clicked, that were ahas, that you remember fondly, or that really just made a difference in how you think, or your perspective, or how you approach something?
Probably the situation that most matches that is when I was interviewing to be the executive director of the Bakehouse Art Complex, which is a artist co-working space with studios and galleries for visual artists that is located in a converted Art Deco bakery. It's from 1927, I believe. That was a place where I was so excited when I read the job description. And I had just come to Miami and I was kind of looking for my next thing. The initial job I took down here was not for me. But I'm very grateful for it because it helped me get here. I just thought it'd be fine at the time. And it just ended up being not what I thought it would be. So I was looking for something and I put my hat into the ring because I was like, oh, all this opportunity to put all of the strategies and all of the practice that I've learned and I've guided and consulted people on, I can do that here. And it was just so exciting. And for some reason, the board chair said to me several times after that, including the first interview, he's like, Marta, you don't have a visual art background. You do not have a visual art background, but you were not the most qualified candidate, but you had the best ideas. And we were really excited about that. And in one sense, I was kind of like, oh, but on the other hand, I was like, but best ideas, they were ready for something different. And they took the risk on me. I was not a curator. didn't have an art history degree. I was not a working artist. I'm an appreciator. I'm not somebody who can like say all the names of all the artists because again, like I was in a practice room for 4 hours a day in addition to doing rehearsals, concerts, making reads, which we haven't even talked about, but not out looking at galleries and museums, although that is something that every time I'm in a city that I don't know, I try and go to the museum because I just find so much inspiration from seeing how people can translate something visual into a visual experience. It doesn't have to be like 2D or anything. But when I was at the Bakehouse, I learned a lot about how visual artists and musicians are different, very different. And that comes from the way that you're trained and the way that you learn your craft. And that was always really, really cool. Visual artists are a lot more individualistic because that's the work. They're working by themselves. Or if they have an assistant, the assistant will, you know, work along with them. But I really learned, I think, in that situation to help a collective of people with individual ideas of what success looked like and really help bring together a community of a shared vision. And I was really proud of what we did. We did a financial turnaround and we did attract a lot of new people to the facility. And part of that was I was new to Miami. Everyone I met and I wanted to go out and socialize and like figure out this thing called Miami. And I did that through going to as many events, seeing other people's work, asking questions, inviting them then to come to the Bakehouse and see it. And I do remember there was a person who came through with a media project called hashtag you wow. And this is I believe he's from Australia or the UK, but he is a photojournalist who just took pictures of people he admired and he did short interviews and then he posts them under that hashtag. And so he asked me, like, what is the best advice you've ever received? And I said, trust and let go. And that was something that at the time I was like, what am I saying to this person who's going to put this out publicly? Like, why did I say that? I should have picked something a little more legit or like something that would look better to the business pages or something. But it really felt real to me because all the times that I have changed cities or changed relationships or something important to me ended without any explanation, I've always been able to kind of like get my ducks in a row. Again, focusing on process, showing up and doing the work for myself. But at a certain point, you just got to let go and trust everything's going to work out. You can't manifest unless you let go. So those two things really stood out as really important moments for me at the Bakehouse. It was very humbling and yet nice to hear that I wasn't the most qualified, but the best ideas at the time. And Kathy Leff has done a really, really amazing job in that institution. I'm such a big fan of everything that's happening over there. I love how deeply they're touching the artist community and doing really creative stuff. And I like to think that I had something to do with sparking the initial part of that after a little bit of a quieter period in the history of that institution. But that was a very important time, and those opportunities helped me see myself differently. It's the first time I really realized leadership is lonely. You can't talk to your board, the boss, with all the things that are totally on fire and bothering you and the anxiety at night when you're like, you wake up and you're like, oh no, did I forget to take the trash out? And, the door is open. Like the crazy, like the alarm goes off in the middle of the night, like all the things. And you can't talk to your the direct reports about like this thing happened or I don't know how to handle this. So I had no idea there's a thing called a coach. That would have been
Yeah.
really helpful to me at the time.
Right.
And that's part of the reason I love doing coaching now is I've been there. I've been on a very small team. I've made magic with no resources, made things happen and found ways to give back and to help people be seen and give them opportunities for them to share their genius in a way that is generous and helpful and win-win. It's not like, I don't know, it's like a nice exchange.
Yeah.
And, we got Picasso in there. Thank you to Bank of America that somehow fell in love with the space and super generous people, super amazing team that brought a piece that they had in their collection in North Carolina. Had always been in the private collection, 26 aquatint sketches that he had done as an older man in his 50s that premiered at the Bake House. And they paid for everything. We did not have security that was adequate for that. And they just helped do all the solving. Then they brought their bankers for an event. Then they brought their employees for an event. I was so, so grateful and totally blown away that we could do that within the space of 2 years of really getting the place back on. I'm incredibly proud of that. And we got some really nice media. Thank you, WLRN. Thank you, Nootropic and everything. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was
So
not equipped emotionally for what that all would need. But I had an amazing community and amazing board come out and support.
so when I go back to something that you were surfacing 2 3 times, and just spend a few minutes on that before we move on, and it's the so that feedback about not being qualified or the most qualified, um but having the best ideas. And for me, like I struggle with that, as many other people. But who said this? I think it's an entrepreneur. Somebody said something. There's somebody out there that's in the mediascape that has, or at least a quote is attributed to them, that if they ever did what they were qualified to do, they would be like literally like mopping floors. Like they wouldn't do anything else, right? If that was like a limiting something they limited themselves to. And in the work that you do now, can we just spend a few minutes talking about that, like not being qualified? Because I mean, obviously, if you're a heart surgeon, yes, please be qualified, definitely, right? But for most things, let's talk about that. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I went to music school. Am I qualified to do anything but be a musician? If you look on paper, maybe the answer is no. But I am a learner. I've always been a learner. My parents are teachers. It was impossible to not pick that up and have that as like the number one passion in my heart. I often with my clients do an exercise at the very beginning, which is looking at core values, and like learning is one of my core values. And I do a lot of things out of just the joy of learning. And I'm always somebody who doesn't want to know what the process is. And this is something as a leader early in my career, I felt very controlling. Like this is what we're going to do. And this is how I would like you to do it. And then I was in a situation where I was being highly controlled and I realized that was not good and it did not bring out the best in me. And if anything, it just kind of like shut me down and gave me fewer opportunities to be expressive and to be who I really was. So I really saw that as an opportunity later on to awaken the how out of other people because they probably have a better way of doing this than I can figure out. So always thinking about what is the goal and then allowing space to figure out the how, but the what and the why more important than or the why first, then the what, then the how. But I don't need anybody to do the how the way that I would do the how, right? So and that took some learning and some mistakes. But for me, because I'm a learner, I pretty intuitive about following the trail of things that excite me. I am very much a person who needs to feel passionate about what I'm doing. And once I figure it out, I've learned it, it's not exciting to me anymore. So again, this idea of recreating, not as important for me, that not as important as learning how to create. And for me, creating means always being in the unknown, trying something I don't know how to do. And so when I look back kind of forensically at what came before in my career, I'm like, oh, okay. I do courses with entrepreneurs, teaching them how to playfully poke at their limiting beliefs and dissolve them. I also happen to have curriculum development expertise thanks to my time at Midori and Friends. Did I expect that would ever be helpful at the time? No, because I thought that's what I was going to do. So I've become qualified by experiencing different things and total immersion with people who do know what they're talking about, like at the Kennedy Center, like at Carnegie Hall, like at New World Symphony. people who are very good at doing a thing, finding guides and mentors along the way was always something that was helpful. I think I would have liked a mentor who's like, this part of you doesn't serve you well. You might want to tone it down, because sometimes that enthusiasm and passion can bite you, if you're not really reading the cues. And that's another thing is like I am qualified by also lived experience of suffering.
Yeah.
There are times when every time I in some way was responsible for my own suffering, but it took a while for me to say like, "Oh, I am actually the reason for this," and to see that as a positive thing. And now when I look back and I see some of the things that have ended or things that have been failures, I don't really think it's failure unless you stop. But the things that didn't go as planned, I'm like, "Oh, thank goodness it happened that way because this other thing was on its way." And that's in the whole scheme. My whole life experience has shown me you can trust and let go. And usually the right thing happens. It's not always like a fun thing, but the right thing always happens. And so I look less at what am I qualified for in somebody else's eyes, but what excites and sparks joy in my heart, what gives me that surge of excitement and passion when I hear about something or meet a person. It took me a long time to realize also, like, this one client, we got to work together. It's inevitable because this and this and this and this. And I gave them one little nugget at the beginning and they're like, whoa. And it changed things for them. And they still talk about it in public interviews. And we've never really worked together. And I'm like, but. And I'm just like, okay, that moment passed. That's not the right person. So I think also your qualifications are about who you're showing up as. And obviously, I'm a big fan of flow, which is optimal preparation with optimal challenge. And there's no qualification for that. So I think more in the micro and the type of work than the kind of role. I do a lot of career counseling, a lot of career coaching, and almost everybody has imposter syndrome because they're afraid they won't measure up in whatever way. And that's an insatiable beast that will never be satisfied. So what I tend to do is focus on not what other people expect you to do or how you perform to them. Again, I'm a performer. I perform. That doesn't do it for me anymore. But to really think about, what is the thing in your heart that is seeking? And then what are you called to? And if it's terrifying, we'll find a way through. But I believe that those feelings are very importantly guiding you toward the thing that is right for you. And there may be some discomfort or uncertainty along the way, but if that's really something that keeps coming back, there's something there. And often, career counseling, people come to me sometimes when they're like, this thing in my heart has been so strong and I can't ignore it anymore. Like, I know this is part of it, but I have no idea how to get started. I'm terrified because I'm leaving the security of this, that, or the other thing. Or, the way I've been working hasn't worked for me. And I'm finally allowing myself to see that. So can you help me re redesign, the nature of the work and the nature of how I show up? So qualifications, I think, is a gnarly one because it has to do with fear of measuring up and also fear of being inadequate to ourselves, like failing ourselves. And more than anything, we're a lot more afraid of not doing the thing that's inside us and capturing our greatness and living it than we are whatever critical thing somebody else has to say. And I was paid to be criticized and I've experienced all of it, including stuff I did on my own after that was totally above and beyond, let's just say, and totally unnecessary, but was very helpful. And the thing that changed my life more than anything was changing those voices, recognizing I had power over my self-talk and changing it to something I'd want to hear from a friend, not just, my worst enemy telling me all the ways I was going to fail. But yeah, I think that's a really personal question. And so it depends on everybody. But being qualified, if you are excited and you feel like you could have an interesting experience, I think you're qualified.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of
Well,
a
yeah,
non-standard answer, I guess.
I no, I it's that's an interesting story because it made me think of when we're limited by other people. Like, so we experience that boundary. It's like, oh, you're not qualified. Okay. but also the opposite when when we limit ourselves, right, and we take ourselves out of the game, but also when we're limiting others and saying, well, you're not qualified. And what I really love about the story with the board, the then board of the bake house, is it's just there's this wisdom of seeing past, like, okay, well, on paper, this person, okay, maybe it's not, you know what, on paper, but then being able to see past that and see like, oh, but the ideas are really, and I think that itself is a super valuable skill, like looking past just the box, it's bringing up for me the what you were sharing about the classical music training of being very like, this is the way and this is the way to succeed and this is the only way forward, which is fine, but also limiting. It can be very limiting depending, again, who you are. Just seeing past that and recognizing, oh, there's other good stuff here, there's other ideas. That's excellent. Kudos to whomever people on that board were able to just have that wisdom. That's just great example.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think a lot of what is really happening at work is stuff no one is talking about. And maybe there's a course on it in business school. I didn't go to business school, so I'm not sure what's in the curriculum other than hearing about it from friends and colleagues and family members who have been through it. But the thing to me that we don't talk about, and I think we should, is magic, which is there is a layer of our experience that we can't explain, but that is responsible for pulling us to certain outcomes. Like, I don't know why my resume kept getting put in the short stack at the bakehouse. I have no idea why. But you're right, they saw something, they were responding to some sort of energy that they couldn't explain. Like, I have an amazing partner, it made no sense when we met. It made no sense. You still look at it and you're like, this makes no sense. But there was something that was a feeling that I was like, okay, as long as this feeling is feeling good, that I'd been in some not feeling good relationships. I could recognize the difference. Experience is a great teacher, but a lot of amazing things that have happened because of an impulse or a desire to connect or somebody popping in my head and acting on that and reaching out. Or just saying like, I don't know why I'm so excited about this opportunity. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and getting a call. Yeah. Bakehouse, Kennedy Center. And what? Okay. But allowing yourself to go with the magic, allowing yourself to honor the impulse, even if you can't understand it. I think there's like castles of greatness that are somewhere in the etheric field of our planet of things that were impulses that we shut down because they didn't make sense. Like my first marriage made sense to me on paper. It was so miserable. That was another experience. It's like, just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's right, and honor your feelings. They're really underneath it. And sometimes it takes a little while to recognize you're having a feeling and to be ready to act on it. But sometimes you're like, I don't know why I'm like, feel like texting this person right now. And then like a huge project comes out of it. I love also working with, so what we're talking about is intuition, right? And we don't talk about it in leadership. We don't talk about it in the corporate world. We really should, because there have been studies done and there is just that X factor with highly talented leaders who allow their intuition to move. I don't have the studies, but I read all these books that talk about it without talking about it. It's the success factor. And this is where also, if there's a quiet voice that is telling you or pulling you toward this thing and you can't stop thinking about it, it's something that is, I feel like the universe is knocking back at your door. Like, I want this thing. I want this thing. And if you don't answer the call that seemingly has nothing to do with it, then you're kind of like shutting out the guidance that you might be receiving. And, I have a spiritual practice, and that's definitely something that informs how I show up and how I run my business and the kind of clients I think that are attracted to my work. but it is a magic factor, and we're not taught enough to go with what's in our hearts. And I see a lot of women suffering from this. Like, I really feel like I should do this, but I know I need to be responsible and I have all these things that I'm expected
Yeah.
to do, and you just kind of see them collapse because there's something magic in the heart that wants to be aired, that wants to be free and explore that thing. And I don't believe that that is not able to happen if you have responsibilities. But again, success on purpose. But
Well,
the magic that's calling you, you got to honor it.
and there's a particular thing that might be labels for, by some really hard-nosed, quote unquote, air quotes, business people or some
Yes.
other people might be labeled soft, but as Martin, very curious and nerdy. So in some science I've been reading and consuming over time, we kind of start to appreciate that there's this unbalanced perspective and way of thinking centered around the brain, the human brain. But the human brain is just part of a really rich and just awesome nervous system, right? If we think of all the sensory experience and everything that the nervous system powers and process for us. And there are neurons in the stomach, and there are other sort of like nerve. I don't remember if it's neurons, but there's definitely a communication of different types of very rich communication between head and head, like literally anatomically, like biologically speaking. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about just in metaphor. And that conversation, like that understanding, and then the conversation that would bubble up out of that is not on the table currently, and hopefully it will be. And that's kind of part of what this project is about. Making business art is exploring that tension of business, art, and science. And by science, I mostly mean like the science of the human being, like really understanding how people work inside and out, biologically and psychologically, and perhaps some other forms of science. So since you already talked about magic, and I'm touching on this, this project, as you well know, because you've been very supportive of it, is called Making Business Art. So let's jump into that. There's a few threads I want to pull and weave together into a conversation. But before I do that, let me just get, what's your gut reaction like? What bubbles up for you when you hear those three words together, like that statement, making business art?
Making business art. I would love it if more businesses looked at themselves artistically, because what we don't see when we're looking at our metrics and our dashboards and productivity is that business is run by people, and self-expression and joy and consciousness are part of your business, whether you know it or not. And so working with those energies and working with the consciousness of all the things that go into it is an artistic endeavor. I actually had a client, a hypnosis this weekend, who was talking about using the consciousness of her art. I'm sorry, the consciousness of her business, which is a coaching business, and really using it, looking at it as a partner with her. Like like I've created this thing. Everything that's created has consciousness on some level because there's energy behind it. Energy carries consciousness. And so just hearing her during the hypnosis talk to that part of her that knows everything about her and that is connected to the energy of the universe, universal energy. She had a really interesting conversation about this whole topic. And I was like, oh, isn't this artistic? But I think there is a a coldness to most of the way people go about business. They see it as outside of people, and they see it as very concrete, not really abstract. If it gets abstract, it's probably, you're probably off somewhere. And in times like, Enron, they're being very artistic with the business and it wasn't ethical, right? So I think for me, when I think about making business art, I'm thinking about how the business is undertaken and why. And the why should be the measure of success. You measure yourself, all you know is what you're not for. How do you define success? This is my running joke. Thank you, Michael Kaiser, with my nonprofit clients. But I believe when people are aligned on the why and you treat them and allow them to be human and to create, you have a much different, more successful business than you do if you don't treat people kindly and you expect them to be rational. Because ultimately that's where a lot of disgruntled stuff, like when people aren't happy, it's because they're not given the opportunity to master and create and bring themselves to the work. And of course, the bigger a company is, the less efficient it becomes when everyone's showing up as who they are. But there are also companies that have some special people who see the individuation of every single person and how they are contributing their genius, and they want to expand for that. And it's not necessarily efficient, but it makes them very successful. So I think for me, making business art is about having a really clear why that excites people, and then having a how that allows them to show up with their gifts and to create and to contribute. And, the Daniel Pink Drive book still gets me. It's like the nature of work that is satisfying is work where you have autonomy. You're allowed to do it your own way. You have the opportunity to master whatever it is, to get better, to grow, to evolve, to transform. And purpose, knowing that your work means something and that if you weren't there, it would be felt. For me personally, I'm encouraging my clients now to really think about the artist studio as the main driver for their success. Because again, artists manifest the unknown. They are professional manifestors. They take things that do not exist and they put them in form. And yes, it may be ephemeral. It may disappear after a moment. And it may be something that lasts for a really long time that it travels around and you can see it in different places, but they manifest a vision into reality. That is what they do. And so I think there's something so powerful about that that doesn't make sense, because taking a vision and making it reality and allowing for personal expression along the way, it doesn't make sense. But there's something in us that craves that thing that doesn't make sense, and that's the magic. So I think when teams are working on process and they're reflecting and thinking about how the process went, and then centering what are the conditions that we're going to play with, and then inviting everybody to show up and maybe play a little bit, because adults forget that that's like actually how you get good ideas. I think that businesses would have a lot different outcomes. And this is why Google they never want you to leave. They'll keep you distracted, fed, and entertained, right? Because they want you to be showing up to that container, and they want to create the conditions that will optimize the gifts that you have. Of course, then what they do with that may not match my idea of, an artistic business. But I think for me, it's really process oriented work that is about outcomes that sometimes you don't expect, but that are right. And SMART goals to me suck the air out of the room. And there's nothing more demoralizing than SMART goals. Again, it's like, it's so cold and solemn. It doesn't allow for people to be human and mess up or to change their minds. I change my mind, not because I'm wishy-washy. I'm not wishy-washy. I get things done. I finish things. I'm committed, but sometimes better ideas come because the first idea was no good. And it was the entry point to finding the third idea that opened up the 50th idea that's really the right one. So when you have a process and you have a container, you set the conditions, you show up and you do the work, even if it's little increments, you're going to be more productive. You're going to have better results. And that's going to be a more artistic outcome.
Yep.
And that allows for magic too.
Yeah. Well, when you're saying that something doesn't make sense, what I've kind of come to think about is that we just don't have a good way of thinking about that thing. Like, it happens, in the world. Like, I think, well, hopefully most of us, most listeners, we've gone to some concert or some type of artistic performance and we felt something. In fact, just a little side bracket science here for a second. I recently in psychology and neuroscience that I've been consuming, there's some studies that show when people are listening to a story together, their hearts start to synchronize, which is it's again it's the human nervous system at work. And yet I think we don't ask really good, or let me rephrase that to be fair. We could be asking much better questions to understand why that happens. And I think the reductionist approach that we have to understanding things has its use, but it's also very limiting, right? The efficiency in business that you mentioned earlier, it's, well, I think with COVID, we've seen that these really efficient supply chains, to invoke here Nicolas Taleb, efficiency kind of leads to fragility. And maybe being so efficient, maybe it's not a good thing. And perhaps we need to rethink that, right? And think about that differently. But I also think of, what if, that I was having a conversation this morning, what if going to work felt like going to a concert? Like, what
Mhm.
if just on I mean, you can't have that every day, but on the balance, what if going to work or showing up to something just felt good and awesome, right? Internally, and then that also got translated into the things that we're making for others. So thinking about that, creating that experience, since you know a thing or two about creating an audience experience and creating that container and making that happen, let's pull on those threads. So we explored, you went to music school, so you understand like the band, right? The that aspect of collaboration and creating a container for a great experience to happen, and and just touching and moving people, which is something I think, I mean, obviously you understand as well. Let's weave that together. How does that come together into like an aspect, an approach, or one of the ways that we make business art? What do you think?
There's a lot there.
It's a simple question. It's a loaded question.
It's a
um
loaded question. Can you hit me again? Because I really
well,
want to
so
absorb it.
let's start like, what are the components for creating that container for great art to happen, for this for touching people, right? With an experience. What did you learn back in the day? Like, what are like the key parts to that?
For me, and again, I started very early at Carnegie Hall creating, I was head of the elementary school programs, which were pre-K through sixth grade. And that is everything from toddlers to preteens who are very skeptical and not all about whatever this thing is that you think is important that I don't care about because you're old, kind of thing. Right. I have to say, there's nothing more exciting than designing an experience where a 6-year-old loses track of time for 45 minutes. That is magic. So for me, that is an art to move people emotionally through space, to move them through time. It is an art. And when I'm working in any container, any project or any coaching relationship, for me is a container. And yes, whatever comes up and we go with it. But also you got to move your clients through space. And when I have a course called Radical Receiving, it's beautiful, it's fun, it's happy. It just kind of like opens you up more to see where you are maybe a little more hesitant than you realize to accept, allow, and receive things in your life. And we kind of tap into it in a slightly different way. So moving people through space, you cannot do at the beginning where you want to go. So there's an arc, an emotional arc that you need to cue up for people to get into flow with you. So it's like the idea of flow again, optimal challenge needs optimal preparation. When you're with people, you can't go right there. You need to bring them along. You need to scaffold in early education, early childhood education. They say you scaffold activities so that your kids will be ready to do the thing at the end of the lesson, but you can't go from here to there. You have to like warm them up, give them something to achieve. You have to give them an easy win. You have to, and to do this with kids, it's no different than doing it with adults. But I think being really intentional about what are the emotional expectations, whether they're spoken or unspoken, and moving people through that experience. Now, what does this have to do with business in general? Your users are people you have to move through emotional space. Your donors are people you have to move through emotional space. Your ticket buyers are people you have to move through emotional space because they're having an experience. And something I see arts organizations, nonprofits making the mistake of is not thinking about their people as having an experience along with them. They see their people in this compartmentalized way of like where they meet them, not what happens before, after, during, and long after. And so, as a designer and somebody who I like to nerd out with about this exact type of thing, I think that part of making business art is getting more playful with the human element of where we're intersecting with people. And that includes clients, that includes employees, that includes partners, people that you are going to encounter in the parking garage of the venue or whatever. So all of that is very, very important. And I think for big companies, creating spaces and dedicated opportunities that are for experimentation, for irreverence, for not having the right answers, for failure is incredibly important. In Jean Case's book called Be Fearless, she talks about how it's her hope that nonprofits all take 1% of their budget, 100%, not 10%, 1% of their budget, and create basically an R&D line so that they are constantly not getting too set in their ways. Because honestly, the strategic plans that I've done a lot of times, creative people are amazing, but sometimes when we're not thinking in the full scope of all of the ideas, we get used to doing things a certain way. At a certain point, that way stops being the most effective way. And we haven't noticed it because we've been focused on other things, probably the creative stuff, the fun stuff, the programs. Um, but there's a necessity to question practice. And I don't see bigger organizations questioning practice enough. And I think that there's a lot of art in that is potential. And anytime you reinvent yourself inside, it benefits on the outside. And whether you're a multinational corporation or not, if you do not change, you will be required to change. We just lived through 2 years of that, right? So I'm not saying that because we didn't change, we were required to go through that. But there are some times when pandemic, a lot of people changed internally. And I think the world that we're meeting in a lot of ways, our society has changed as a result of, you know, those needs to change our habits, are the way we spend money, the way we spend our time, the way that we interact. Like if you do not change on purpose, you probably will be required to change or you will meet something that will stop working. And that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that way is done now. And so rather than have it be a failure of the business and shame or just like make questioning practice a part of what you do. It can be playful. It can be very rewarding. And especially if you're open to ideas from anyone, it can actually, that's where innovation comes from. That's where the art of your business can come from. So it doesn't have to be everything all the time. You can create appropriate containers and opportunities with a regular cadence to do that. And it might be once a year. It might be like the FedEx days where they have one day a week where they just do work on their own projects, but
Yeah.
designate that.
There's something I meant to ask at the beginning and I totally slipped. And I just been curious to ask somebody, and here we are, going back to the classical music, like what is the role of the conductor, and like what is the value or the thing that the conductor brings to the band in the work that they do, and specifically in a performance.
I'm curious to hear what you think of that to start.
I don't, I mean, again, I'm not musically educated, so I don't even understand why the conductor's there, because everybody has their sheet music and they could just read it and play. So why the conductor in the first place?
Well, it's kind of like when you have a very large business, it's helpful to know who to go to when things go wrong. It's kind of like that. I loved in music school, I also had to learn how to conduct, and that's a whole different type of skill because when you're conducting, when you're seeing a person conduct, you think, okay, they're in time with the music, they're doing their thing, everybody's with them. But really, what a conductor's job is to be ahead of things and anticipating things. So if you're a conductor, you're living a couple of beats before everybody else. So what's the value of the conductor? It depends on how big your ensemble is. If your ensemble is one person, you don't need a conductor. If your ensemble is three people, you probably don't need a conductor. The Orpheus Chamber Orchestra worked a lot with us in my grad program. That's an orchestra that does not have a conductor by design. So everything is musician run. It's totally democratized. They have an artistic committee, and the players decide what they play. And whoever's in the leadership roles will be conducting using like they'll show time. One of the functions of a conductor is time, showing time. So you can be together in time because music is about time. So you'll have people in the orchestra use their instruments and their bodies to kind of like keep the time together. But as part of the conducting class, one of the things that we did was we watched really old videos of Fritz Reiner in the Chicago Symphony. Dude was really, really like crusty. I don't know. You watch these films and you're just like, man, this guy is serious. It's kind of like the Bugs Bunny, like the serious conductor kind of thing. But this guy would have a stool on stage. He would sit down. That's not a thing that you do during performance. You stand up. You can like see everything, the whole orchestra. The orchestra is your instrument, really, if you are a conductor. You're responsible for things much more than time. But a lot of that, the bigger the ensemble is, it just helps to have somebody. But Fritz Reiner, saw him conducting a Haydn symphony. It was like Symphony 102 or something like that. And he would start them. And then he would sit down, flip his tails back, sit down, put his hands down, watch what's going on. He'd cue with his eyes, because the conductor helps people feel confident that they're in the right place. When you are a musician, you count a lot. You count rests. You don't always play unless you're a violin. Trombonists, I mean, they're sitting back there for whole movements, not playing. And they've got, I don't know, 85 bars of rest. It just says 85 bars of rest. You get really good at counting or approximating where you think you are. You cue, you figure out who plays right before you so you don't get lost. But honestly, I've gotten lost so many times counting rests. But then when things started to get a little off, and like Haydn, it's pretty clear when you're together and when you're not. So he'd just raise his arms and kind of do a little bit of tweaking when things started to fall out of time. And then he'd bring it back and then he'd put his hands down again. Not conducting. This is the boldest thing. We see these emotional, passionate conductors and they're like all emotional, like Leonard Bernstein, like so emotional. And is that necessarily necessary, right?
To
But
watch.
it's fun to watch, right? And one of the things that the conductors do is they do balance. So if the strings are too heavy and you can't hear the woodwinds, they're playing a Mahler symphony. The brass section it's all about the brass, and then the violins are doing their tromolo. It's just like they keep things in balance, and they help the texture of the music be performed successfully. They are in charge of like dynamics and sometimes even like the texture of the music itself. I don't mean just from how loud everybody is playing, but like how much of this and how much of that. It's like the fader on an audio board. Or I guess that's this one.
Mm.
Kind of like helps keep things in balance, but it's the overall character that they're responsible for. So if it's Beethoven
Yeah.
6 and it's the pastoral scene with the thunder and the person falling asleep in the grass or whatever, it's going to be a different thing than Pines of Rome, which big bombastic kind of brass section and everybody like going toward this, musical climax and the percussion is going. So like it's a very different thing, but
Hmm.
I think the character of the music is an important role that the conductor will play and cueing and dynamics.
Right.
And then when you add in chorus, it's like a whole other thing. So, and what a
Well,
conductor does to follow opera, like is so different, so different, so different.
yeah. So, well, I'm gonna bring it back.
Okay.
This all has a point.
Long answer.
I'm
Sorry.
gonna bring it back, audience. Don't worry. So recently I've fallen into this Rick Rubin legendary music producer rabbit hole, and I'm stewing in that
Nice.
and just trying to understand like, well, what is the role of the producer? Since I'm not in that world, you hear about it, but I never really stopped to think about that. And something striking about Rick, I think he played in the band like early on before he got into production, but he doesn't really play an instrument and I think each person brings their own style and way to approach production. But there's just something really interesting there about the person that's creating the space, the clearing, the creative container for great art to bubble out of people, right? And work with people to get into that space of vulnerability, let really great art come through, shape, right? Shaping what's coming out, employing taste, pulling that together. And in fact, earlier today, I was recording another conversation and I landed on this, and it was with a friend who's super music fan and he used to play in a band, etc. He does website stuff now. He still plays, and we were speaking about Steve Jobs and then kind of layering on Rick Rubin, like a music producer. Steve Jobs is comparing, contrasting, like it's kind of like the same role. And and that's why I wanted to dig into like, well, let's ask Marte about the conductor, and it's slightly different role, but not too different. And then
It
what
also depends.
lessons,
If you ask a conductor, they're gonna have their own gonna
oh,
have
I'm
their own
sure.
answer.
Yes.
I think.
I'm sure, well, everybody has their own approach at the end of the, it's like the teacher, right? This is my way, you're gonna clear your mind, and this is my way, right? And there's who knows how many music teachers in the world with different ways. But the point being is how, what metaphors or what learnings might we pull out of that conductor, music producer role and world that a business leader or an organizational leader at an arts organization, nonprofit, or philanthropy. And philanthropy needs way more art, by the way, and that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, that we can have another day. But what lessons might be there for leaders that they can draw inspiration from, or skill, or something to lean into or find out about and practice? What do you think?
I love the question because I've thought about it, but not in many, many years. And so
Mm,
it's kind of like way fresh coming back and thinking about it again. For me, I think the idea of having that person focus on the why and the what and be meeting all of the different hows and making a cohesive whole out of all of those individual impulses. And I think that's what a great leader does.
mm,
Always focusing on the why and the what. This is the why. This is what we're going to do for that. The how, okay, I'm going to trust my team. I'm going to delegate, right? But then I'm also going to be responsible for how it all fits together. And I'm going to, like you said, shape it, tweak it when it needs to be tweaked, save it if it's really off the tracks. I've been part of performances where people had to like stop and start again. So like that happens.
yeah.
I've also had my sheet music in totally the wrong order. Like
Oh no.
having to stop for me for that situation, how mortifying and completely crippling to the ego. You learn to be very careful and detail oriented when you're a musician. But I think in the end, if it's not a success for all, it's not really a success. And that's the kind of thing that that culture of feedback and of individual and whole, I would have always wanted that to be like more like, let's debrief now. How did that go? And like, let's celebrate the wins. That's not something you do in music. You just pack up your instrument and walk off stage.
Oh, wah, wah.
I know. It's like, oh, but we could have celebrated the brass. And okay,
Yeah.
when everybody's doing the bows at the end, and hopefully there's like multiple standing ovations or whatever, but really seeing the people stretch themselves.
Mm,
That's another thing is I think a lot of times really good leaders look at what the potential is and they stretch their people sometimes past frustration or through
mm,
a little bit of like, kind of, I don't want to do this, but they get better results. I remember the Berlin Philharmonic had one of the very first female assistant conductors in a German orchestra, which was like still very locked down as a like primarily male space. But Gabriella Contratto or Graziella Contratto, she came and conducted Schumann's Second Symphony when I was in grad school, second year, and I was playing principal. And there's a big, big famous oboe solo in the second movement. And I remember she just kept picking at me during rehearsal. She's like, oh, more, 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 more. And we came to the concert and I just brought it. And I saw her backstage afterwards and she's like, so you don't really do rehearsals, do you? But you brought it for the concert. And I was like, but I wouldn't have brought it if she hadn't really pushed me in rehearsal.
right.
And that's another
Right.
thing. You as an audience are seeing the final product. You're not seeing all the messy, painful, crazy, neurotic stuff that might be happening before that. And rehearsals are very interesting. You just sit for 3 hours, the break in the middle at 15 minutes per union rules or whatever, and you play whatever the conductor wants to play. And sometimes you'll play it all the way through and you know how it is. And
Yeah.
sometimes you'll play sections and hope for the best because you've never played the piece all the way through.
Right. Well, perhaps
And
that
some,
aspect of conducting we don't pull into business. We kind of leave that
there you
in the
go.
world of conducting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the part of what we want to bring into making business art. Marta, I do want to be mindful of your time, so we're gonna start to wind down here. As you very well know, because you've been a supporter of this project is driven by beauty, which we talked about, the art part, and also curiosity. And of course, I've been very curious, poking at different aspects of your life. But I want to open up space to allow you to share what are you curious about lately? What are you exploring? And that can be
Gosh. Wow.
whatever it is. And maybe
So many things.
maybe might have to do with hypnosis. I don't know. Feeding
Maybe.
the conversation, but you can choose something else.
I'm so curious about so many things. Right now, I'm in a journey of self compassion. I'm learning what that is. I find it really easy to be compassionate for other people, but you can't really do that unless you're doing it yourself. And I certainly know I'm all about transformation, partly because it is inside me as something that I'm here to do. I live it, I breathe it, I adore it, I love it, but it wouldn't be my thing if I weren't actually accomplishing it. So getting into a space of being of service to humanity, what I've recently realized is you cannot really help others until you are healed. And a lot of us have pain and trauma and really unpleasant things that we've been through. There's these layers of hurt that we've been carrying around. And so the best thing you can do for anything you want to do with other people is to focus on your own healing and to honor that and to really start to learn how to receive and move through that space. From that space, you are not acting as the person carrying around those things. You're acting as a healed person, and the way you show up and the way that you contribute is so much different. It's just a totally different vibe. So I'm reading the book Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff right now. I'm having a fun book club that I'm putting together just for fun. I'm actually reading this book with my sister and my mom separately. And I'm just excited to share about that. And I don't mind sharing things about myself if I believe that they will help people. I like being vulnerable is not a thing that keeps me up at night, but it's because I know you can't transform if you are not willing to be in a place of uncertainty or the unknown. And a lot of times,
True.
this vulnerability, it's vulnerable because it's not known. How are they going to see me? What will they think of me? All those, will they judge me? Will I be okay? Will I measure up? All of that stuff comes from that place. So I'm curious right now about all these different ways that human beings can be healing from whatever it is that has been adverse in their lives, but that has helped them become who they are. I always feel like you get to a place, you wake up to things that have happened, and you either do one thing or another thing. One thing is you just keep going, you ignore and you suppress and you push through, and or you heal or you take responsibility and decide you're going to be a certain way. And that's a very tough thing. We're taught more than anything by people who love us and want to keep us safe that stability is the most important thing in life. But at a certain point in my experience, like your hurts will stop you from being safe for real. So I think just like our world would be so much richer and so much more empathetic, compassionate, functional if we were all not operating from a place of trying to get something, but really sharing our gifts in a generous way. We all need our gifts, and suppressing identity and suppressing humanity and being right and being dominant is, and all the things that we learn about the way the world works. It's my hope that we wake up to a more generous way. And I don't believe you
Mm.
can really be generous until you are generous to yourself. So for me, I'm very curious about healing and all these different modalities, hypnosis, energy healing, self talk,
Yeah.
law of attraction, manifestation. Like all these things really are about changing our thoughts about things to achieve different outcomes. And some of these things are behaviors and practices that are lodged in our bodies and our physical space that we're not even aware of and conscious of. So it's finding tools and sharing tools and going through my own process to unpack and clear the channel so that more light can come out and hopefully help humanity and contribute in some way. And I feel like I couldn't be a good coach if I were not having a coach and working on myself. And I could not help businesses transform the way they do things, become more abundant, more successful, and more fun, by the way, if I were not always in those practices myself. So, yes, I do hypnosis. I do a hypnosis modality that uses the theta brainwave state of trance, which is between sleep and waking up. It's where the weird things start to happen. You're kind of like in a dreamlike state, but you're still kind of like awake and conscious. You can have a conversation, and bringing people into space to get to that relaxed part. In that relaxed part of yourself, it's not your logical brain that is telling you all the things that make sense. You tune into something that is more your right brain, creative, intuitive part of yourself that has access to a much different viewpoint than your conscious left brain, rational, logical mind has access to. And I love that space because that perspective is very healing in and of itself. And so I love the work because it's just a privilege to help people trans translate information from their consciousness to facilitate. It's the ultimate facilitation. I love facilitating, bring people through emotional space. This is the ultimate version of that. And it's something I do as part of my coaching practice. It has its own name and brand called Quantum Healing Miami. I have a website and a YouTube channel and an Instagram channel where I do that work, but it's very much about a different form of transformation that stands alone. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm curious about a lot of things and I like to have a lot of things that I'm learning and doing all the time because I've never liked just one thing. And I've been othered and told I'm wrong from day one. You're not serious enough. You only can do music if you want to be successful, or You have to pledge your life to one organization. It's just not for me. I love variety and I love committing to variety. So there's always going to be a bit of a cadence and something that I'm learning for the pure joy and pleasure of learning. But ultimately, all of these things I'm curious about are because I'm working on myself. I'm trying to do my best to help humanity in whatever way I can, learning, growing, shedding old ways, improving myself. I work on my character. I have a long way to go, but I know I'm a better person than I was last year because I literally work on it every day. And I'm self critical, but not self criticism, if that makes sense. I engage in
Mm.
being self critical, but not self criticism oriented.
Yeah.
So, and that's just being honest.
Well, there's
And
a
that's helped my
distinction.
discernment a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a distinction between beating ourselves up versus just having discernment, like, oh, I can be better in this way. Like, let me
Right.
improve a little bit, right? So
Right.
it's a fine line though sometimes. Marta, to land this conversation, let's now transition to our lightning round. I have a lightning round of questions. Some are silly, some are more thoughtful. Feel free to
Nice.
pass, but I do invite you to be very honest. They're easy
Okay.
questions. Except maybe for
Ooh,
this
the
first.
unknown. I like it. Let's do it.
It's maybe for the first question. It is a little bit personal, but we'll see where we land with it. Marte, can you describe your closet and what state it's in?
Oh, my closet is pretty orderly. I have just for height sake of clothes, I have it pretty organized and I know where to find things. The part that's messy is that I'm constantly in a state of exploration and changing my mind about certain things. And that may be the article of clothing I want washed or don't want washed, or in there, I keep a lot of my spiritual tools. So I have my journal, I have my hypnosis, I have sheets for the bed in my office. I keep them there so I know where they are, but it's pretty orderly. It's also pretty playful. My closet has Christmas decorations from my family. It's not there's just like 2 of them. They're very small.
Mhm.
It has my ice skates because I used to ice skate. It's also got some prints and some artwork that I gained as part of a program here in Miami that I haven't framed yet. It has my vacuum cleaner and tons of colorful, amazing shoes. And I love my shoes so much. I have not been wearing a lot of shoes during the pandemic, but it's a place that actually activates my imagination because I also have very colorful clothes and they bring me an intense amount of joy. And it's a happy place for me because it's like possibilities and I love it.
My goodness, a lot of going on in there. Well, thank you for sharing
Thanks.
that. What is the last piece of media that you loved? That could be a book, a movie, a podcast, anything.
The book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. It's about
Mm,
all of the ways that we have been holding on to pain in our lives and how he and his research team at the University of Massachusetts, I don't know, he's in Boston. He has a whole foundation that's about trauma research, and I believe in what they're doing. I love that book so much. Every conversation I'm in, almost, I recommend the book because even if we don't think about ourselves as being carrying any of that around or having experienced that, I think it's important to normalize the discomfort and the potentially painful experiences we have had because they fundamentally shape us. And that book is like so beautiful and so open and so helpful in giving examples where you're like, oh, I think that might be me. And also the range of modalities from dramatic play to EDMR, I think ERD, anyway, rap, this rapid eye movement for people who've gone through PTSD, just all these different ways to get healthy and to heal yourself. It's an absolutely fundamental book. I recommend it to everybody. So that's the last piece of media that I've read that has been
yeah,
really
I've
fundamental.
I've heard the title in different places, so I
So
feel
good.
like I need to get around to reading that. Next question is, what is something that inspires you?
Hmm. Always being out in nature. I think people inspire me more than anything. I love ideas. I just love seeing people be who they are. And I see a lot of people being scared to be who they are. And the transformation from that scared self to fully embodied presence is so beautiful. But I just love people. And that could be like knowing my mom is going to send a newsy text about the weather and what's happening with her or her book club. She's in 3 book clubs or 4, not including ours. So just people and enjoying and appreciating people. And I come a long way in that because I used to just be so judgmental and so hard on other people, partly because I was hard on myself. But yeah, people are amazing. A lot of them are just scared to do the thing that they're here to do. And that's normal. But there's company, there's beauty in that.
Great. A song that you must play during a road trip.
Oh goodness. Pretty sure Destiny's Child Survivor is the main one. I don't know why. I once went on a road trip with my sister and that came on and we still talk about that time when that song came on. And so just in her honor, pretty much every road trip I put that on.
That's awesome. And then finally, what do you want to see more of in the world?
Kindness, joy, courage to be who people really are, to do what's in their hearts, not just what makes sense. There are ways to do that and still be secure and safe, but more joy, more freedom, more love, more kindness, happiness,
Wonderful.
generosity.
So, lastly, what do you have going on that you want to share with listeners? And where can people find you?
Sure. What do I have going on? I have coaching. If you're interested in my coaching, I have my website, culturedinnovations.com. My Instagram is probably the most up to date thing. I try to do reels and posts and stories every week. And I also have my quantum healing hypnosis technique practice, which is quantumhealingmiami.com. Also have an Instagram there. And if you want to get a little bit woo and learn more about what it's like to talk to your higher self, that's all what I talk about over there. And things I have coming up, I have some sessions open in May, and I usually book about 4 to 6 weeks out. So always happy to talk to somebody on the phone, answer any questions about that. Anybody who's interested in coaching or consulting, more information's on my website about the kinds of things that I do, but also happy to have a 30-minute free consultation with anybody who is feeling compelled or feeling attracted to the type of work that I do and the approach that I use. And it's just, again, I love meeting people and learning about what's on their minds and always finding different ways to help and to be of service while helping people step into their solutions to the powerful vision they have in their mind.
Excellent. Well, Marte, first of all, thank you so much for being a friend of this project. Thank you for so much for making time to be with me today. I've learned a lot about you and from you today. I think there's some really interesting insights that we've unpacked, both the learnings from your journey and thinking about making business hard. So thank you so much for making the time. And we maybe you'll come back and we'll chat about some other new things that you're exploring since you're so curious, like I am.
I love that. Thank you so much,
Excellent.
Ezekiel, for having me. And it's what a tremendous honor to be in space again, doing my favorite thing of being with people and talking about ideas and sharing. It's really been a joy. And I salute you for what you're doing and so, so proud and happy to have this kind of conversation in the space out there in the virtual world. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm so, so valuable to have your leadership in every way, and especially out as an innovator in the space, bringing people together around curiosity and beauty. I think it's tremendous and our world needs more of it. So keep going.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Bless you, Marte. We'll have you on later on.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Bye bye.